Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to work on this Revell Black Pearl kit. I actually did this kit 2 years ago, but I had 30 something hours of footage and had to go to everything because some parts, like since this was a large ship, weren't on camera that well, so I had to cut out a large portion of things and had to make sure that I show the progress in the right order and all that. And it just took a while to bring myself to edit this, and then to actually edit it now took me a couple more hours than I expected, but I think it's worth it. The reveal in the end is kind of messed up a bit, but I'm gonna talk about it then. But for now, let's get into the start of this kit, and the steps are quite cramped. That's normal, like this is a higher difficulty kit. I've done decently high difficulty kits before, but this one definitely takes the cake so far. And I was a bit worried because, like, when I first worked with Revell, their kits weren't that accurate, so you struggle to really put pieces together. This one was supposed to be better, but this is a large ship with large casted parts, and large casted parts tend to deform, so we shall see. Hopefully things are gonna work out. But for now, here's what the kit looks like. Essentially, it comes with these little bags full of like just plastic casted pieces, and they all come on sprues, they all come in frames. You have to cut them out with very sharp cutters, best flush cutters, and then you should, technically you don't have to, but you really should, to make things fit, use an X-Acto knife and a sanding stick or sandpaper to clean up all of the flashing and just make sure that the pieces fit together really nicely. I would always suggest, if you make a kit like this, dry fit everything before you glue, because once you put glue on, especially in this case because I'm using plastic weld glue, you cannot really change anything. So I always made sure to test fit all the pieces before I glue, put them together, maybe even with tape beforehand, and then apply the glue to all the gaps. The glue I'm using here is plastic weld glue that's specifically made for the plastic, and how it works is essentially it is a solvent that eats into the plastic, makes the upper layer soft, and then it essentially completely sticks together the plastic with its own material. So it's not like a normal glue where you add glue and the glue itself is the adhesive, but technically you make the plastic the adhesive. That's why it's called a welding glue. This was actually the part I was most worried of, was the body of the ship, like this entire huge part, the sidewalls and the interior. So I used a lot of clamps, a lot of tape, made sure that everything aligned. I did have a small gap in one area, but I had to live with that gap after test fitting pieces because I found that they wouldn't really fit if I didn't. But it was fine since the paint's gonna cover that up. Well, while that was drying, I put together the inside pieces, and I had to be really careful. There's some tiny cast pieces, like you can see at the rails, like all the railings and all that are actually not the tiniest, and there was a lot of like way tinier pieces that took me ages, really ages to put on with pliers. But still, you need to be careful when handling large pieces that you don't like push and break any of the smaller pieces off. But luckily I managed to fit things, and after test fitting, letting the base dry, I added like the lower deck pieces that are on the side, so like the front lower deck and the captain's quarters and all that. And while I was doing this, I was already deciding that, like, I looked into the directions before, and that's actually another good suggestion. Look into the directions beforehand a little bit so you understand what's going on, like at least for the next few steps. I looked into the directions a little bit and I saw that there's nothing in the captain's quarters. The thing is, you can see in there's windows. So I was like, I really want to decorate it. Like, we see the inside of that place a decent bit of times, especially in the first movie. So I actually took some screenshots and, you know, I kind of molded and 3D printed some stuff. I'm gonna show you guys later. I actually did do that off camera because it took me quite a while, and like again, this video is super long and there's no point in me showing what I did like in detail. Most of the stuff I added are actually things that I've done before on this channel, so I'm just gonna like show you guys and quickly explain what I did like way later when it comes to that stuff. But for now, it was important that I painted the inside because at this point, they don't tell you that you don't get access anymore, but I saw that we're gonna at some point soon put on side panels, and I immediately knew I needed to paint the insides. There is no way to paint them anymore after, and you have a lot of cannon ports and stuff, so you need to paint it or else you're gonna see this ugly grey peeking through. So what I did here, I used the Revell suggested paints, and I just mixed a greyish black with a little bit of brown while it was still wet, and this gave this nice like wooden old wet wood effect, I guess, which is precisely what I wanted, so this worked out really nicely. Also, this plastic is, except for where it's textured, very like smooth, so painting on it and having the paint stick without any like gesso or other base coats is super difficult. So you want to make sure that you use these kind of paints that they suggest, or you want to make sure that you prime and gesso your model if you want to like use acrylic paints, because from my experience like it will not stick that well. That being said, the rest of the model is mostly textured. There's very few smaller things that aren't, but for the most part, like the only thing that was smooth was the lower decks, and you know, with that one you're not gonna really touch too much on it anymore, so technically you could use acrylics. I would just also be worried that it would like not have the things you add under deck with glue stick to it, and the things being precisely cannons. Many cannons. I spent a couple of hours building and painting these cannons, and they're actually technically movable, so you know, the metal part swings up and down, but getting that right for all the cannons was a chore. I managed in the end, but I think it took me like 3-4 hours to build and paint them, so this already was a lot. But yeah, for these, very simple, I started off with a black base coat, added some brown on the wooden parts, and then I'm adding like this, I guess, black detail, blackish detail, and silver detail on the like rings of the wheels and stuff like that. You know, old-timey wooden wheels, they mostly had like metal bands around them so they wouldn't wear and tear as much. And so I went and kind of painted that, and then I stuck them in, and yes, half of them are in the lower deck, so you will only see essentially the metal part of the cannon sticking out of the side of the ship. Well, I still wanted to paint all of them, because if you shine technically a light in there or look for details, then you're gonna see them, so yeah, I just make sure to paint all the cannons and make myself like a ton of work. And then it was time to get the sides finished and glued together. You had to actually put in the anchor lines and like glue them in securely. For that I used super glue, because I found that it genuinely works best with any kind of string. The welding glue is not made for this kind of stuff. You can melt the string into the plastic, but I found it doesn't hold that well. So super glue it was for this. And then I welded together the side pieces, which actually wasn't that bad, and then I painted them with the same technique that I used for the lower deck, like floors and side walls, just a little bit. And like for the rest of the ship I'm going to use multiple coats. You can see it's a little bit sheer, but in this case didn't really matter. Also, I made sure to leave at least a little bit of the sides. The paint is made to be able to, you know, allow the adhesive to work on the plastic, but I just wanted to make sure that it will. Also, this part was surprisingly one of the most amounts of pain, because it kept bending like crazy. I used a ton of tape and clamps where I could to hold this down until it stuck, and yeah, for a moment there I thought I was wrapping a present. But now onto the captain's quarters. The floor is getting the same treatment as the other parts with the brown and black. The side walls I'm just for now gonna paint black. And then I was also deciding that I wanted to add lighting. So I want to add a lamp in the captain's quarters, and the Black Pearl has very signature backlights, like really large lanterns. You can see them in detail, especially like, for example, when Jack stands next to them in Pirates of the Caribbean 3 and stuff. And you can see they're ginormous, so I thought that lighting them up with flickering LED lights would be actually super fun. So I ordered my stuff. I made sure to add stuff on the inside. I made a tiny table, tiny sideboards, and just added a couple of papers on there. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a couple pieces of 3D printing that you will not really be able to see because the windows are very tiny, but you can see a glimpse of them. So, you know, essentially just like a couple cupboards that were just like strips of, essentially you can use foam, and then just a table with like more elaborate legs, which you could totally make out of skewers or something. But yeah, to the wiring, I ordered some press buttons, and I wanted them specifically in black, so I paid a little bit extra for these. But I like melted in holes into the upper deck, and I then glued them in with super glue, making sure that the buttons are being able to press down all times. The deck will be painted mostly black, so I'm not worried about them being too obvious. Maybe they're barrels or something. But these switches have a neat function, and that is they are screwable, so you can screw in the cables, you don't have to solder them, which I was really happy about because I was worried that if I move around these tiny cables, they would break if I had to solder. So the only parts I had to actually solder were these lamps. For the inside, I added a little bead cap on the bottom of the LED just with super glue, and I painted it black, and this will be representing like the inside ceiling lamp. And for the outside, I built together the clear lanterns, and then I just made sure to not add the bottom piece and instead add the lamps. They actually fit really nicely, and I could just glue them in as is. I didn't really have to drill anything out. Like, the LEDs just fit, luckily with a nice bit of tolerance. So I added a lot of soldered wire and some, you know, of this like cable protection cable shrink wrap. I forgot what the word is, but shrink tubing. There we go. I'm not gonna go back in this voiceover and edit this. I spent far too long trying to get the beginning part right, so ignore me. But yeah, I just soldered on all the cables, put the legs of the lamps together. I made sure that the cables aren't too long, so I wouldn't have them sitting on the inside too much, but also that they are more than long enough to reach everything. So I test fitted them every step of the way, and then to secure the cables a little bit more, I essentially just used a stick of hot glue. Just smothered that on there, and then I made sure to carefully add the wires and screw them in. And for the lamps, I'm actually just going to use, first of all, 2 different switches, one for the inside lamp, one for the back lanterns, and they're just like button battery powered. So I 3D printed like a little half circle case, and I made sure to not glue on the upper like grids, the like loading grids, I guess, that they put onto the hatches for like loading in goods and all that with cranes when they load their ships. And I just plopped the batteries in there so I can take them out whenever. And then I just added a little bit of paper with super glue on the inside of those hatches, grids, whatever you call them. I'm honestly not a professional in knowing ship stuff, so gotta excuse my terminology, but I essentially elongated all the sides so it sits in there like a lid or a cap, so it just hides all the insides from the top. And then I made sure to paint all the insides. Like, the switches are white, but I made sure that the plastic was fine with this color. And you can also paint wires with them, although it can scratch off, I found, but it definitely holds a little bit better than acrylics. Like, these kind of wires, painting them with acrylic is so annoying. There's like base coats and stuff that you can use, but luckily the paints I had worked for this. really well. Also, I should mention, I think I forgot, these are enamel paints. So they do have like matte versions. These dry a little bit shiny, as you may see, but that's okay because especially on the outside I'm gonna add weathering. As for the windows, they didn't supply any plastic, but I wanted to add some, so I just used packaging plastic, and that actually works with welding glue very well, at least the one I found in my case. Then I just topped the lid off, or like put the, I guess, upper deck on the captain's quarters. I also made sure to cut out half circles that would fit the cables on the side before I plopped everything in. And again, I test fitted everything so many times, and before I glued I made sure to turn on the lamps a bajillion times, because although I can switch out the batteries, if there's anything wrong with my soldering or anything, I wouldn't be able to fix it anymore. And then I weighted it down with a little glue weight. Added in some of the side window parts that I finished and painted from the inside. And with that, I had my captain's quarters, which you can't precisely see nothing of that I added. That's why I'm not gonna show you guys any like close-up pictures or anything. You can't see anything. You can barely see the light. So yeah, I spent all that time adding things on the inside. That's why I didn't show it, because yeah, you can't see them at all. You can see a faint light flickering, nothing more. I really thought you would be able to see more, but adding the plastic probably like prevented that totally. It just spreads the light really nicely, it doesn't do anything else. But at this time I was blissfully unaware of that. Like here you can see, this is with the lights on. And practically all my other lights off except for a tiny light for the camera to actually adjust to anything. You can't really see the inside lighting on camera either. That's why I didn't even try to take pictures, or I did try, but it didn't work out at all. I did also print like a little, I guess, C-channel to cover up the wires on the upper deck just a little bit. It's just a simple C-channel that I then cut like with my X-Acto knife and fitted that on, and I think it just makes the wires look nicer. I know it looks a bit more bulky, but I'm totally fine with that. And then it was time for the little rescue boats, or bi-boats, and in this one I totally forgot. I was so excited because this was super cute to make. I totally forgot to paint the insides. Also sorry for my hair peeking on screen sometimes. Again, this was a super large project. I had to have my camera on stream so far away. Also that is why there's the little Linktober CreatorCon date there. Yeah, that was like right around the corner from CreatorCon. That's why I have that sign there. It's been 2 years and 2 other CreatorCons since then, which were an absolute joy. But on my screen I had the sign and I cannot really cut it out of most parts or you will not be able to see what I'm doing here, so bear with me, ignore that, just enjoy the little Korok. But yeah, this boat was an absolute joy to make. It was so cute. I really loved it. This was a lot of fun. And I kind of needed that because I knew what would come sooner rather than later was all of the ropes. And the ropes would be really painful. I actually looked ahead in the booklet and there was pages upon pages and I knew it would be a nightmare. So I tried to enjoy this process while I could. Plus there was some really tiny pieces coming up that I knew I had to put on with pliers and a lot of patience and a sturdy hand. So this boat was my favorite part at this point. I had a lot of fun creating like the lighting and all that stuff, but that also was like, I guess, the main a little bit. So in the end I was kind of sad that it didn't work out, but I guess I had fun. I know it's that there's a lot more details in there that you can see, but honestly the ropes were what broke me a little bit. That being said, you can see I did paint a little bit of black underneath the cannon spots before I glued them in, because I knew I couldn't reach them anymore. So I just made sure that at least the base of it has a little bit of black, and then it will not have this glaring grey shine from underneath whenever I paint the rest. Adding these tiny side pieces was the first of many painful things. They kept slipping, they kept turning, there was no really flat anchor point to glue them because they had like little round spheres on each end that you were supposed to glue them on. So I had to be very thorough in trimming them, and then very thorough and very steady-handed to glue them in. Same with these ropes that are hanging on the back. They actually have a little hook on one side to hook into the cannons. It was bad. And then before gluing the tiny boat in, I also needed to paint that. So I painted the base of it, not the top, which maybe I should have, but you always have hindsight and you learn more after the fact. But yeah, I glued it on, not knowing that it would be a pain to paint later. Added all the rails and all the ropes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, at this point it was gluing on all the details on the upper deck, you know, the stairs, the rails, all of that. And then it was actually time to do the first part of roping, and this one was okay, but still a bit tricky. You had to essentially wind the rope at the front mast. I don't know, is this called the mast? I'm not too sure. Either way, you had to wind the rope around it like multiple times, make sure that it's really nice and tight, and also lube it through like teeny tiny gaps. So I used some super glue as help, made sure to like wrap it around really neatly, which took ages. And after I did that, I secured it with more super glue, just make sure that everything lines up. And then you had to wind the thread around to create tension and really pull. There's a lot of tension going on when you build ships, like especially with the ropes. And I was a bit worried because this is plastic, and in some areas it comes back to bite me because the amount of tension you need to get the ropes even, you can't really do on this kind of plastic, but I managed in the end, even though it's not perfect, even though some parts look ugly, but this part actually looked pretty good. I knew that I would kind of paint it a little bit more because this isn't like the actual fitting rope color I found, so I knew that adding super glue and having that slight fogginess wouldn't matter, but at least the rope was very secure. And after that, it was time to glue on these front side railings, and then I also added the little galleon figure after the fact, and I was looking forward to that so much. So I was really happy to do that, but sadly my camera didn't cut it. I then spent absolute ages adding the shutters for the cannons and the tiny ropes for it. It drove me insane. Then I added the figures on the back where the lamps are, and then I made the other masts. And this required a lot of pre-prepping for putting on all of the ropes for the sails and stuff, because there's a lot of like, I don't know what they're called, rollers, I think in English, that you have to essentially add on like tiny strings in like very specific lengths. So I used a needle tool to get the right lengths, and here you can see all of them. And this was just one part of the mast. Every mast had like multiple of them, and this was already very tedious. So I was happy that before I glued them on, I got to paint everything. Starting off with black here. Just again using the enamel paints, being very careful that I don't hit any of the clear parts of the lamp, nor put too much paint around the switches, because again I need the switches to work. So I made sure that every time I painted around them, I made sure to move them up and down a lot while I was painting, and like half an hour and then an hour after, and to just go around them with a drier brush to make sure that they're really not sticking, and that worked really well. Painting the railings and all the tiny details was a pain though. It was lovely to see everything like finally come together a little bit, although at this point everything's just vanishing into a void. Even for me at this point, even though I have very bright lights, but yeah. It was just a bit tricky, but at least you could see like all the grey parts that are not meant to be grey, especially after it dries. This paint that I'm using, as you can see, it's actually not that glossy specifically for this part, and I guess that's because of the texture. Like, it's still a bit more glossy than I would like, but at least the texture prevents it from being like really glossy, so that helps. But yeah, painting around all these tiny strings and everything, I lost it. I had to go back in between some of these shutters and stuff and glue back on either some of the tiny like pegs that are holding them open, or some of the strings, or some of the shutters entirely. So you see me once in a while I'm painting, just pull out my glue and fix anything that was going wrong. Also again, I'm really sorry that I don't know much of the ship's terminology, and like, I'm being honest, I love this ship for the series and I'm quite fascinated by old ships, but I never really got into learning any of the terminology. Like, I love how they look. I love this kind of historic style ships in general, like wooden ships. They just have a really nice aesthetic, but yeah, you're never gonna, or maybe never gonna hear me talk about like ships in real detail. But yeah, the Black Pearl in general was just a dream ship of mine. Like, I love Pirates of the Caribbean, and this ship just stuck out for me from the moment that I first saw the movie, or the first one, and from then on I was obsessed. And to this day, Pirates of the Caribbean 1, 2, 4 are my favorite movies ever. And that's saying a lot, because I do like a decent bit of other movies, but these I just can't get back to whenever, watch them many a times. And I'm a person, if I know something, I hardly can watch it again, because I don't know, it just starts to bore me at some point sometimes. Not all the movies, but a decent bit of movies. I can watch them when it, like, a lot of time has passed, but Pirates of the Caribbean I can go back and watch immediately after I watched it, so that's why it is so special. And I've been watching it, like, by this point a couple 100 pounds, like, since I was a child, and I just can't really, you know, ever say that I got bored of it. So this ship I always wanted to have. I saw like an older version of it, like a smaller version as a child, and from my memory that kit sucked. It was so bad at the time, that's why I was so worried about this one. But this kit was actually quite decent. I was a bit worried because the plastic is quite bendy, especially the smaller parts, and it's coming back to haunt me, especially when I do the lines and ropes and all that kind of stuff, but for now it was fine. That being said, after that I just painted like the deck with a red and then a sandy color, just to have a little bit of contrast. And like in some of the pictures of the Black Pearl, it has a very dark deck, like dark red deck, and then I added some like barnacles, brown, green and grey to the bottom of the ship with some dry brushing. And as for the sails, I painted them on stream, just base coat of black, and then I picked out all the other colors I had and added some tiny squares, just to give like this patchy look that the sails do have on a lot of ships. And I think that has a lot of charm, because they would use whatever material they had on hand, and having a black ship have a lot of like these neat patches, you can tell it's traveled a lot. I also added like a little bit of brownish wash to the sails, as you can see in this lighting. And then I spent ages, and when I say ages, I mean like 8 to 12 hours just pulling on the ropes, and it was not fun. What you can't see here that much is I had to actually super glue some of them, because they snapped after I already glued one side on, and I couldn't for the life of me like get that side off without breaking half the stuff. So I had to cut the ropes at some points, glue them together with super glue, and I hated it. It was the least fun part. It looked amazing in the end, but also it made the entire like masts of like, especially the front mast, made it bend forward a lot. I put a lot of tension to the back too, but for some reason like it didn't let itself tension easily. It would snap the ropes and all that, and like from the steps I had it very even in the beginning, and then it just started leaning more and more, and I just couldn't get the tension, like things would break off, and I was so disappointed. But yeah, here you can see actually my best attempt of taking a picture at the time. I since then moved, and I put it in a box very carefully with like foam, like a little foam cutout on the bottom, and like a lot of tape and strings wrapped around it so it wouldn't move. I sadly cannot take it out at this time and take better pictures, but for the moment where I had it, like, this was the best I could do. So the far away picture, that's what I meant with, sadly the reveal is not going to be going that great. It sucks, but at least some of the close-ups give you some of the weathering and some of my painting ideas. But yeah, I had a lot of fun making this kit, but at the same time it was the worst kit I've ever made. I was so happy about having it finished. I'm still super proud. I later discovered that wood kits are still being made. Like, when I was a child, it was these like little newspaper things, like comics, soft cover, I don't know what they're called. Like magazines, I guess? And they came with wooden parts to build the Black Pearl, and I really wanted that, but they were super expensive. And then now I found out there's actual wood kits that some companies make, so I definitely want to make one of those, because I'm a bit disappointed with how the parts are holding together, especially over a long time. Since I built this, had several lines that snapped. And just for me having it on the shelf, like, some plastic pieces randomly fell off that were super well on there, like before, and just randomly broke, actually. Like, they didn't fall off on the glue parts, they just randomly broke off. And I didn't touch that ship, they just were from the tension of the ropes and all that, and for me working in between just like weakened, and then they broke. And for some of them it was really hard to fix. And then at some point it also got dropped during like an unfortunate accident, got knocked over, and parts of it totally broke. I had to put in like some wooden dowels and all that kind of stuff to fix a lot of things, and by this point it has seen a lot. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful still, but like, I wish it would look a tiny bit better, since this is something I really was proud of. Right now I don't have any space to display it, but in the future at some point, I don't know if I want to sell this one to somebody, maybe somebody wants this, but in the future I want to get a wooden kit. I want to spend a lot of time being very careful putting it together and then being able to display it. That will take 8 years, 10 years, I don't know, but I may buy the wooden kit beforehand just so that it doesn't go out of stock. But yeah, despite all that I had said, I really enjoyed putting this kit together and streaming things. Was it worth the 40 hours of work? Maybe, maybe not. I think the process was very enjoyable up to all the ropes and stuff like that. And I guess the only thing that was redeeming was how it looked after. I just wish they weren't ripping as much. They use like very fine cotton thread. I think I should have maybe waxed it or something, or they should have provided a little bit of a stronger rope material. But in the end, like, I love the outcome, I love the lighting, I love the design, all the details. I'm really happy with it, and I hope you all enjoyed this very messy process, but I really wanted to upload a video about it. And yeah, hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye.